Hey all, welcome to part 2 of building a custom Kingdom Death board. And probably saw my post last time. Of course, Kingdom Death, their Kickstarter did announce that they were going to make their own plastic 3D version of the board, but hey, that's alright. I've already got this going, and we'll make it a unique one. It'll be my own. So anyways, this is the board that I built during part 1, and it is now ready for some tiles to be put down on it. So what I'll be doing during this video is I'm going to be tracing out the lines on the board to lay all the tiles down, and then once I do that, I'll kind of explain sort of the vision here of what I'll be doing next to make it a little more creative. And then I'll probably also cut the design that's going to go in the middle of the board, which you probably saw last video is going to be a lantern. The idea is that we're going to have some kind of tiled lantern in the middle of the board, and so I have got a piece of MDF here that I'm going to trace out the lantern on, and then use a skill saw to go ahead and cut it out. So anyways, hope this video is entertaining. I'll see you in a bit. Alright, and so just to catch up here, so I've laid some tiles out to give me kind of a frame of reference. So you can see they are currently 16 by 22, and one of the things that I noticed putting this together was I was going to have a space over here for the cards, but I'm thinking I don't want them to, you have to drop your hand down into the game board to pick them up. I think that's going to be challenging. So what I'm actually going to do is I'm going to create sort of a raised area right here. I'm going to put like a platform down so that they're sort of above the table, make it a little bit easier. But anyways, I've got the start of the tiles down, and now I'm going to start wood gluing them and put the rest on. Okay, so after gluing down about 350 something tiles, we've got the board, and come to some sort of realizations on how this is going to actually play out and what's going to work for this board. And I'm realizing I'm going to have to change some of my original plan, but I've come up with, I think, some kind of fun ideas to still make this functional and look cool. I'm going to talk about that at the end of this video, but what I'm going to do now is I'm going to actually start cutting out the centerpiece that's going to go over here with a piece of MDF. This being Kingdom Death, and you know, everything being like lantern years and stuff, I thought it'd be kind of fun to have that in the center as a centerpiece. So I actually have a little piece of MDF right here, which I'll trace out a lantern on, and then I'm going to use a skill saw and cut it out. And then the idea is I'll sort of break it apart and make it look like kind of a broken tile out in the middle of the board. We'll see how it comes out. So here we have the centerpiece. I've got it all printed out. I'm going to be cutting it out now, and then we can see how it fits on the board. And the design has been cut out. It's kind of hard to see right now because it's wood against wood. It's right there. Again, I wanted it to look sort of broken up. It'll look quite a bit different once we get some paint on there and kind of highlight everything. So the next part of this build, I'm going to create the place where the cards will go. Now, I originally had planned for there to be enough space for them to go down here, like on the actual board, but with the wood tiles, it took up a little bit more space than I intended. And so what I'm going to do instead is I'm going to build maybe like a little platform, so it'll be flush with the rest of the wood here, and it will just come up just like this, and then you won't have to reach down to get cards too, so it should make it a little bit easier. Okay, so went ahead and built the little stand here for the cards to go on. It's actually not quite secured down yet, but I cut the wood and it's all good to go. So I'm going to screw this down and then sand it so that it's all flush. Of course, you can see kind of on the side there, I got a little bit of creep from when I placed these tiles down, so it's not quite accurate, but it works for the most part. Shouldn't be too confusing. Now earlier I said that having built this now, I realized that I'm going to have to make a bit of a change to what the final product's going to be. So originally I wanted to make this as close to the board, the actual board game board, as I could, and so the idea was I was going to kind of mix some plaster with sand, and I've done this before with like other miniature boards for things like Warhammer and Malifaux, and I was going to put this sort of plaster, dirt, glue mixture onto the board to create essentially like a gravel effect, and I was going to make it fluid enough that it would sink down into some of the slots here so that you would still have the outline of the tiles, but you would have a gravel effect atop of it. And then I was going to take some skulls and some like faces, sort of like the actual board game has, to give it that look. But I realized the gaps between the tiles are just so tiny, and then putting like the skulls and all that stuff on top of the dirt and the plaster, one, I think you lose the definition of the tiles quite a bit, and two, I think it would make it pretty difficult for models to stand upon. Just because of the varying heights. And of course you can see that some of the tiles are like at different heights right now. The original plan is I was actually going to sand it all down so that they were flush. I've decided to leave it instead, and it's because of this sort of plan B that I'm going to be doing instead. So now I'm going to go over a new idea I have for the board. I think taking the board in a different direction isn't a bad thing though, particularly since Kingdom Death is going to be making their own plastic version of their board. And I think it's going to look better than anything I could try to reproduce to look like the board they currently have. Rather than trying to make my version of that board, I'm going to go ahead and make a sort of unique board, all of its own. So taking this board in a different direction I think is actually going to increase some of the functionality, particularly allowing models to stand upon the board. So I'm actually going to be drawing upon a board that I've made in the past for Malifaux. So if you look at one of my introduction to Malifaux videos, you'll see the board I'm talking about. And in this idea, what I plan on doing is I'm still going to be adding some detail to the tiles. I'm going to be putting down some skulls. I'm going to be putting some other things down that I'll tell you about. But the idea I'm going to go with here is instead of sort of a gravelly, sort of sandy material that I'll be putting down, I'm actually going to be laying down some epoxy resin over the board by probably a good maybe centimeter even above the tiles themselves. So what this will do is it's going to give it sort of like a swamp-like look. I want to go with a theme of maybe sort of like a bloody swamp that the characters are fighting in. And what this is going to allow me to do is I'm going to be able to detail the bottom, putting some cool things like skulls and swords and antique kind of looking things that I'm going to be placing at the base of the tiles, making them completely scattered across the board. And then placing an epoxy resin on the tiles will seal everything in so that you have this hopefully incredible sort of like detail going on the board while still having clear definition of all the tiles, so there's no confusion on where a model can move. And then the epoxy having it a good centimeter above the tiles will allow models to move freely above all of the detail sort of 3D things underneath it. So while I know this is a departure from the original plan, I do think it might create sort of a uniqueness to this board design. And if I ever want to buy Kingdom Death's 3D version of their board, it sounds like that option is going to be available. So in this case, it'll be a nice unique board that's set apart from what they already have, and hopefully will be pretty functional as well. So for part 3 of this video, now that the board is pretty much constructed at its foundation, I'm going to be laying down some of the details that I want atop of the tiles, including things like the skulls. I have some like plaster looking faces that I'll be gluing down on the board, and then I'm going to start painting it. So I'll first probably spray this all black to prime it, to seal everything, and then I'm going to probably do a little bit of work on the tiles by dry brushing and washing, giving them some detail. And then likely what's going to be the fourth part of this series to start to finish this series out in the completion of the board is going to be placing all those 3D objects that I told you about that I want to lay down on the tiles. Now the fourth video and that last part of doing all of that work is probably going to take some time, largely because most of the items that I've purchased to go in the board are coming from another country, and they expect it to take about 3 to 4 weeks to arrive. And so I imagine we're gonna have a bit of a period before the last and final video comes out. Thank you guys for watching though. If you enjoyed this video or you're curious to see how this board comes out, please feel free to subscribe. Click the little bell that gives you notifications. Again, thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.